Well, good morning, Algebra 1. It is Tuesday, April 14th, and we're going to continue on in Chapter 11:5. We're going to talk about square roots of variable expressions. So we've only done numerical expressions so far as our radicand. Today, we're going to add variables. Now, there's a little bit of a twist today when you start talking about variables, but I'm going to go ahead. I'm not there to help you as much one-on-one. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit simpler than it is in the book. Okay, now let's first talk about this. If we have the square root of -9 squared, what we would do first is square the -9, and we have the square root of 81. Well, we know the square root of 81 is a positive 9. The square root of 81 is not defined to be -9. So, but we have to be careful because the original value was -9. And -9 is squared, but the answer is positive 9. And so when we get to a variable, that variable x could have been a negative number. But when it's squared, we get this positive, and then we want our answer to be positive. So when you're squaring a variable that is squared, I'm sorry, taking the square root of a variable that is squared, your answer is going to be the absolute value of x, or the positive number. Just like over here, even though the original number was negative, our answer is a positive number, a positive 9, not a -9, because the square root is defined to be only the positive root. And this is a little confusing, isn't it? Okay, so what I'm going to do is on the homework, you will see some answers that have absolute value. You do not have to put absolute value in your answer. So don't worry about that. So when you do your odd answers, look at your odd answers in the back of the book, just ignore the absolute value sign. I'm not going to count that against you. I'm not going to put it on a quiz or a test. So just know that that's what this means. This means when you're taking the root of any number, it has to be a positive answer. Okay, but don't worry about that. It gets pretty complicated when we're talking about, variables to a higher power, like x to the 6 or x cubed. So we are not going to go there. We're going to keep it really simple. You may avoid or just don't use the absolute value signs. Now, moving on. What if we want to simplify the root of 196y squared? Well, 196 is the perfect square of 14, so that's not too hard to do. But what do I do with y squared? Well, really, I'm going to break it down to the square root of 196 times the square root of y squared. And so that is going to become 14, because 196 is a perfect square of 14, so that becomes 14. And the square root of y squared is simply y. Now, the answer key will say 14 absolute value of y, but you do not have to do that. So just don't worry about it. Just say 14y for this year. We'll probably in Honors Algebra 2 go ahead and throw in the absolute value, but for right now, it's fine without it. Now let's move on to another one. We've got the square root of 36, x to the 8th power. Oh, we're getting to a higher power here. Let's break that down. The root of 36 times the root of x to the 8th. Well, we know the root of 36 isn't that simple. That's going to just become a 6. But what about the root of x to the 8th? Well, x to the 8th is really x to the 4th squared, isn't it? And so what's the square root of x to the 4th squared? Well, it's simply going to be x to the 4th. Because let's look over this pattern over here. The square root of 3 squared is 3. The square root of 14 squared is 14, because a square root undoes a square. It's like they're inverse operations. So over here, if I have x to the 4th squared, then the square root of that is just simply x to the 4th. Okay, so you're thinking of x to the 8th as x to the 4th squared. Now let me give you just a quick little tip here. Whenever you're taking the square root of a variable to a power, for the square root, you just divide the power by 2. So the square root of x to the 8th would be x to the 8 divided by 2, or x to the 4th. Just a little hint for that to help you out. Now, let's try this next one. I'll separate it out here. Whoa, what is that? That is a trinomial. The square root of m squared minus 6m plus 9. Now you might recognize, and you should recognize, that that is a perfect square trinomial. Let me get over here so you can see it better and I can be in the picture. And so we're going to factor that. We're going to factor that to the binomial m minus 3 squared. This is back from our factoring chapter. Don't forget it. Math always builds. Okay, so now what's the square root of m minus 3 squared? Well, remember, a square root undoes a square, and so my answer is simply the binomial m minus 3. Let's go to one more. Let's go over to the square root of 18x cubed. Now, it might help. Now, remember, yesterday we learned about something like the square root of 18. We're going to look for perfect square factors. And 18 can be written as 9 times 2. Well, we know how to do that. But what am I going to do with x cubed? Well, x cubed is really x squared times x. All right? And x squared is a perfect square of x. So let's break this down. The square root of 9. The square root, let's skip over, I'm going to put the square root of x squared. I'm putting my perfect squares out front. So what am I left with here? A 2 and an x. So 2x is just going to be under the radical here. Now, the root of 9 simplifies to 3. The root of x squared simplifies to x. And I'm left with that 2x as the radicand. 2 and x are stuck. They're stuck under the radical sign. There is no way to get those out of there. They're just going to stay in there. So let's review here. By 18x cubed, the 18 became 9 times 2, and so the 9 was simplified to a 3. And then x cubed is simply x squared times x. And so the x squared is a perfect square of x, so that can be simplified and lose the radical sign. Okay, now let's go to this page, this flip side. It's not a page, it's a side of a whiteboard. Okay, now let's review here real quickly. If I gave you the equation x squared equals 16, you've got to remember, and this can be something that my honors Algebra 2 students forget, that x squared is 16. X can have 2 solutions. Let the exponent remind you 2 solutions. And those solutions are x equals 4 and x equals negative 4. So if x squared equals 16 is my, equation, then x has 2 answers. X could be positive 4, x could be negative 4, because negative 4 squared is 16, and so is positive 4, okay? Now, please don't get that confused with the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is only the positive value 4. But when we're talking about an equation with an x squared term, you can have 2 solutions for x. With a square root, only 1 answer, and it's the positive root. Now, let's solve 9x squared equals 64. The book gives you 2 ways to do this. I'm going to tell you, when you're just got an x squared and you want to solve for it, isolate it. It's the easiest thing to do. So I'm going to isolate by dividing both sides by 9, and x squared equals 64 ninths. Now, if x squared equals 64 ninths, what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides. And the square root of x squared is x. And we're going to take the square root of this side. And the square root of this side is 8/3, isn't it? Okay? So I get x equals positive or negative 8/3, just like x equals positive or negative 4 over here. So please don't forget, we call these quadratic equations, and we're going to talk a lot more about those soon. But remember, with a quadratic equation, you're going to have 2 solutions. One will be positive and one will be negative, because 8/3 times 8/3 is 64 ninths, and negative 8/3 times negative 8/3 is also a positive 64 ninths. Now, let's talk about what you're doing today. Well, you had your self-test yesterday, so I'm going to have a glare with this light. Sorry. Okay, we are going to go ahead and have a quiz today. Open textbook, open note, not open friend, not open mom and dad, okay? It is a quiz on 11.1 to 11.3. I've already uploaded it. I'll And you have until 9 o'clock tonight. You can take as long as you like. Please just go ahead and put all your work and all your answers on a plain piece of paper. So much easier for me to grade. You do not need to print this quiz off. Just go ahead and look at it on your computer screen and just write your answers in 2-column format on your paper like you do homework. Okay, now you have a problem set, 11.5 to do, and that's going to include 3-word problems, but they're not very difficult, so I think you're going to be fine with those. If you need help with those, come to Zoom at 11 o'clock today. If you're concerned about anything from the self-test before you take the quiz today, come to Zoom at 11 and ask me some questions about that, and we can review for the quiz also. So I've only seen 1 or 2 people recently at the Zoom meeting. That's fine. I guess you're doing awesome and don't need any help. But if you do, I'm always here. I've got my meeting room open from 11 to 11:30. Okay, and if we need to go past that, we will. All righty, well, have a great day. Take that quiz by 9 o'clock tonight. Get that problem set done, and I'll see some of you at the Zoom meeting today. Otherwise, I'll be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday morning. Have a great afternoon.